Abraham Joshua Heschel said, "Some are guilty, but all are responsible. Do your responsible part and get out and vote and talk to your nephews and your uncles and your grandmother living in Virginia and North Carolina and others and encourage them to do the same thing." We're back. And the reason I spent time talking about this practical joke I played on my family is that many of you may not know it, and I want these presentations and broadcasts to be very intergenerational. But if you look at your great-grandparents or your grandparents' home, in their home they oftentimes had a piece on the mantle, a picture of Jesus Christ, John F. Kennedy, and Martin Luther King. These are very important people in that triumvirate to many black families. So I was appalled, shocked, depressed, depleted when Robert Kennedy Jr. endorsed Tangerine Man Agent Orange. And so for those of you who may be older or more well-read, I'm not necessarily talking to you. But I'm talking to young people too, young people and people who are apathetic about voting in terms of what this really means. John F. Kennedy had that symbolicness, that symbolic importance to the black and brown community and all the Kennedys. And so that joke I played on my cousin would not have worked if I would not on the letterhead have put, as I said, Office of Robert Kennedy. That name carried clout. Many years later, when I moved to Boston, I had the great fortune to sing for Nelson Mandela when he was released from 27 years of incarceration. And after singing for him, it was an incredible event that I was involved in. I was called and asked by someone who was at that event to sing for their wedding. That person was a Mr. Wilbur James, who owned Citizens Energy along with Joe Kennedy. There was the Kennedys coming into my life again. He wanted me to do Negro spirit. No, he wanted me to do South African songs, and I refused. So we talked about it, and I wasn't interested. So finally, he invited me down to his office. And when I got to his office, I realized that I had known of the work of Joe Kennedy in providing oil and heat to poor families in the black community. Once again, the Kennedys involved in social commitment. At any rate, to make a long story short, I decided to sing at his wedding, and I did, and the wedding was held in Rockport, Mass. After the wedding was over, I was approached by Mrs. Ethel Kennedy, the mother of Robert Kennedy Jr., and she said, "Larry, it was great what you did today, and I'd like you to sing for the Christmas party at Restoration." Restoration is in Brooklyn, Bedford-Stuyvesant, in my neighborhood, was a nonprofit started by Robert Kennedy Jr. to empower the black community in terms of housing and in terms of financial wealth. But at that event, I met Robert Kennedy Jr. Years later, Wilbur and Michael Kennedy would invite me to accompany them to South Africa when Nelson Mandela was now President Mandela. So I had a great time meeting Desmond Tutu and all these people, along with Michael Kennedy, who later on, unfortunately, was killed in a ski accident. So the Kennedys have always played an important role in my life, from a young black boy in Bedford-Stuyvesant to years later, these events. And so I want all of you who are listening to this to recognize it's important to know history. Robert Kennedy Sr., the father of Robert Kennedy Jr., joined forces with a young Marion Wright Edelman, who founded the Children's Educational Defense Fund. If you don't know what that is and you don't know who she is, look it up. And Marion Wright Edelman happened to be born and raised in Bennettsville, South Carolina, where my family's from, Bennettsville, South Carolina. And Marion Wright Edelman was responsible for taking Robert Kennedy, who was the Attorney General under his brother, President Kennedy, to the Delta and the poor Appalachian regions of America to see poor people. And when Robert Kennedy saw all those poor, starving children, his whole politic changed, Robert Kennedy Sr. And he came back with a real commitment to working with poor, disenfranchised young people. So there's a whole history here I'm giving you in very bite-sized pieces. That's why when Robert Kennedy Jr. endorsed Tangerine Man Agent Orange, it was shocking to me. And it's a lesson to all of us to think about what responsibility do you have to your family and their legacy. I want us to recognize how important it is for you to register and to vote, and to get out and understand this is a game, and you got to learn how to play that game. When I was a young boy in middle school, they were fighting. Black folks were out voting, and that's how we got community control. And I remember when the teachers in Brooklyn went on strike, all of our teachers, like our parents, went on strike because black and brown people were fighting for community control in their neighborhood. And I remember that all of that was such an education to me as I watched young white teachers cross the picket line and be called nigger lovers, and people spit on us. And so as I sit here today talking about what can we do, each of us can do something. It is important for you to call your relatives in those borderline states where the votes are not clear. Call them up and have that discussion with them, how important it is to go through the mechanics of just voting. I'm not telling you who to vote for, but vote your best interest. So if you have time to roll a blunt, if you have time to sit in a beautician's chair for 8 hours and have them to put 10 pounds of false hair in your head, if you have time to watch 50 Cent shows on cable that are just a murder spree of black people killing each other because folks are invading their space of selling dope to our children. If you have time to stand in line and see a Tyler Perry movie for hours, if you have time to do all these things, then you have time to register and go and vote. That's a very minimal thing people are asking you to do. If you think voting is not important, then you need to look at the history of how all of those activists that you're reading incorrectly, who fought and got people registered by the NAACP to vote and others, took that time because they realized if voting wasn't important, why are they throwing so many obstacles in front of us to stop us from voting? And so I say that the Robert Kennedy endorsement was shocking to me because of the things that family has stood for. Not always right, not always as we thought, but what they've stood for. And I think it's time for us to do our part. This election coming up is a referendum on everybody. Some folks in power have dropped the ball, and they have allowed a woman of color to be the nominee and to be the person representing the Democratic Party for voting for president. No one person can make a major difference in dismantling or even challenging the corporations in this country. But the point is, as Maya Angelou says, when people show you who they are, believe them the first time. When you have one candidate that has voted to kill your black children, like when the young brothers in the Central Park incident were accused of raping and murdering this young white woman, when DNA found them to be innocent, one man took out ads in the New York Times, Tangerine Man Agent Orange, that is to bring back the death penalty to execute all of them, even after the verdict came in that they were innocent. Folks, on that alone, you should register, you should vote, you should take the time to call your relatives in these states where battleground states. I'm talking about North Carolina. How many Negroes live in North Carolina? Please. North Carolina, South Carolina, Pennsylvania, all those border states where it is a whole lot of folks that don't look like us that are going to vote. Folks dropped the ball when they allowed Kamala Harris to become the candidate for the presidency. I don't care what has happened in the past, or but they said that and they didn't do this. My last message is to the brothers. I have been reading some disgusting stuff on the internet about black men and the scathing things some black men have had to say about Kamala Harris. Just scathing, just irresponsible. How can you love your mother and your sisters and your wives and your lovers and be so absolutely insulting and demeaning to this woman? Let me say this to y'all clearly. Black women vote. Sisters vote. Black women have carried these last several elections. And although we may have not gotten everything we need and want, the point is we did get some things. And so I want you all to challenge people in your families, people in the barbershop, people on the street corner that you know that are being paid by, allegedly being paid by those who would want to continue to cause this kind of turmoil and hubbub in our communities, and challenge them on some of the things that they're saying. They're wrong. We've had people to talk about how there's been a Asian hate bill. Wrong. It's just wrong information. It was another hate bill. We've had several of them that have been legislated in this country and others that have not been passed yet. Don't blame other disenfranchised groups who organize and say we're not going to take it when we've chosen to be lax and sleeping on the damn job. So I want you all to not, hey, I'm doing this very impromptu, but do some reading. Recognize that you're wrong in some of the things that you have said. Recognize that the so-called bill that was passed and signed by many black congressmen and others of the crime bill, we signed that bill because we were tired of cracking our neighborhoods. And so some of our greatest black politicians, black men and black women, signed that bill, and the bill was passed under President Clinton. But we realized that just in the case of Robert Kennedy Sr., who allowed Hoover to surveillance and to put bugs in Martin Luther King's home, he recognized after meeting Marion Wright Edelman, he was wrong. And he changed his whole posture in terms of his outlook on poor people and black folks. Not completely the way we might want it, but he did. And so we have to do our part. So have a good day. I hope that this has been meaningful to someone, at least one. The point is, it's a new day. And with it being a new day, we need to do all we can to make sure that we, in fact, create a healthier future for our children and our neighbors.